Well, hello. My name's Jimmy, and I'm a sub 3 hour marathoner. I've waited a long time for that intro. 2 weeks ago, I had the race of my life. I ran 2:57 at Perth Marathon. So in this video, we're gonna be breaking down the race and taking a deep dive into all the data. We're gonna be talking about factors affecting fatigue, race tactics, the effects of drafting, nutrition, hydration, all of that good stuff. The plan going into it was actually really simple. Stick with the sub 3 hour pack right up until 32K. I wasn't hurting at all, felt very easy. Everything went to plan, all of my nutrition, hydration, it all went perfectly. Come that final 10K, I was ready to lock in and really just empty the tank. We overtook exactly 100 people in the second half, 54 of which was in the final 10K. Divine. But before we get into all that, a very quick overview of my training beforehand. 12 weeks prior to this race, I started doing the Norwegian Singles approach, which, if you haven't heard of it, you're just aiming to do a large volume of work at sub-threshold with no VO2 max work. So I hadn't done any VO2 max work for, I don't know, probably like 4 months prior to the race. It had all been sub-threshold and easy running. It was a fantastic training block. When I started it, my goal, to be honest, was just to get a PB. I would have been happy with anything under 3 hours 10 for the marathon. I certainly wouldn't have dreamed that I could have gone for sub 3, but I made a huge amount of progress. The plan going into it was actually really simple. I was gonna stick with the sub 3 hour pack right up until 32K, and then I was gonna make a decision if I could push on or just hang with the pack. So it was actually really simple, and I guess that would be my first lesson from this race, to do with like mental energy. And I think for the first time, I got to experience just what a big effect thinking has on a race, because it takes up a lot of energy, it uses carbohydrates, it uses just mental capacity. And because I was cruising for so long and didn't really have anything I needed to think about, I almost never checked my watch. I knew we were going faster than we needed to break that 3 hour barrier. I wasn't hurting at all. The first 32K felt very easy. So my mental load was really low, and I could do what, you know, the Kenyans talk about going to sleep in the first 32Ks. That really was what it felt like. I just didn't have to think about anything, was very relaxed, zero stress. Everything went to plan, all of my nutrition, hydration, it all went perfectly. And so come that final 10K, I was ready to lock in and really just empty the tank, both mentally and physically. And one of the things that really caught me by surprise is how easy those first 32Ks felt. Now, I can't really describe how easy, and it was weird. Like we split, I can't remember the exact time of the first 5K, but we averaged 4 minutes 11, which is significantly faster than the 4:15 needed to break that sub 3. And I'll just explain at this point. There were two paces. There was a guy up the front who I was with, who was running quite a lot faster than sub 3 pace. And there was a guy at the back who was really sticking to 4:15s. And I actually really appreciated that. People were well aware of what was going on. Everyone in that front pack with me knew we were running quicker, but chose to be there. And I think it was really cool having that choice. And I'm not joking, if you asked me at that point, Jimmy, what pace are we sitting on? I honestly would have said about 4 minutes 50. Like, no kidding, that is what it felt like. It felt maybe even slower, like it didn't even feel like a steady pace, it felt easy. And you can see in my videos, like from my breathing and my talking, I'm just absolutely cruising.
I'm feeling very good. This is feeling very easy.
Now, this kind of freaked me out, because if you've seen a few of my previous videos, I was getting worried about how I was going to go on race day. Everything was feeling harder. Marathon pace felt really hard. And all of a sudden, on the day, we averaged 4:11 over 5Ks, and I thought we were running about 4 minutes 50 per K. Like, what is going on? And on that note, just this morning actually, Steve Magness released a video all on fatigue. One of the things he was saying is that exercise physiologists now are saying that we can think of fatigue almost like an emotion, that we can control it, we can manage it with our brain, with our thoughts. And one of the points he was making is that our perception of effort is very much controlled, modulated by our motivation. And I wonder if that had a big part to play on race day, because, you know, in workouts, motivation, yeah, you want to get your workout done, but there's nothing riding on it. And I wonder if, because I've noticed this before, like in races, I'm every single time surprised at what I can do. And I think this is why, that just the motivation's there. And so the perception of effort drops right off and we can outperform ourselves by quite a lot every single time. It's probably mixed with shedding fatigue. I think I probably accumulated more fatigue than I realized, because, you know, fatigue is not something, you don't wake up one day and just realize that you're fatigued. It creeps up without us really noticing. And in hindsight, I think that probably happened to me. So the taper fortunately fixed some of that. So I think we had two things going on. The taper did its job, but also I think because that motivation was so high, like I really wanted that sub 3. Like that's a big milestone and a big achievement for a bloke like me, who's, you know, not particularly athletic, who's never achieved anything in the athletics world. Even though I knew that I'd done all the work, I'd achieved a huge amount in the training block, I would have felt like a failure if I didn't do it on the day. I know I shouldn't, but that is how I would have felt if I didn't get it done. The race execution in general was nearly perfect, and I would have to say, that was such a fun way to run a marathon.
Now that is how you run a marathon.
Like, we overtook exactly 100 people in the second half, 54 of which was in the final 10K. Now, okay, that was a lot of fun, but also highly motivating. I was passing like 5.5 people every K. And you know, when you're hurting at the end of a marathon, that is that's really fun and is really motivating, and it helps push you on. And also what I notice is recovery time when you execute a race like that, when you have such a negative split, recovery time is much less. Like the next day, I went out for a run and I was expecting to feel terrible. I was expecting to basically have to shuffle along, to be really sore, but it just wasn't. Yes, I was aware that I ran a marathon the previous day. Like, don't get me wrong, I wasn't going to go and do a session, but I wasn't crawling along either. It was kind of my normal easy run pace. And the following days, again, it just felt better and better. There was quite a lot of tightness in my calves afterwards, though, I would say. So I definitely had some DOMs the day afterwards in my calves. And then that later developed into some real tightness and pain. But one thing that I found really helped was massaging with a massage gun. And I recently started using this Bob and Brad massage gun, and I absolutely love this thing. So this is kind of new to me. I've had it for about 6 weeks now, and it is so cool. Like, one of the things that I wasn't expecting to love about this is the form factor. Like, it is so small, and because of that, and lightweight, it's such a pleasure to use. I find I use it more. So the way I've been using this, I don't know if you're familiar with the Bob and Brad thing, but it's got this other head which both heats and cools. So if you put this head on, you can set this to heat, so it not only will vibrate, this will heat. So you can get it on its highest setting, it heats up to 45 degrees Celsius, but it's also got cooling, and it cools down to 10 degrees Celsius. So the way I was using it is, after my runs, I had it on the cold setting to try and reduce that inflammation, reduce the swelling. And then later on in the day, I had it on the heat setting on the calves. And within a few days, it cleared up to absolutely nothing. Like, my calves feel absolutely fine now. And they were pretty sore before. It's just really cool. It's really powerful. So it goes up to like 3,000 RPM. You've got different speed settings. The charge lasts a long time. It's really quiet, because I always use this in front of the TV with my family at night. And my other one was just like super loud. It's really annoying. You have to crank the TV. Whereas this one is much quieter, because it's got a brushless motor in. It's much quieter. It's much smaller. It's a pleasure to use. I'm a big fan of this. So if you're in the market for a massage gun, I've got a link in the description for a 10% discount for you. Highly recommended. So as I said, overall, I'd say the race execution was nearly perfect. Now, I have no regrets and I wouldn't change a thing. So if we're being hypercritical, I would say that I did hold back too much in that first 32K, especially considering the weather. Now, I knew it was going to heat up a lot as the race went on, and that of course is what happened. I think when the race finished, it was about 19 degrees Celsius, which isn't hot at all. But on that course, in that scenario, it is quite warm. The course is very exposed, like there is absolutely no shade, but also it's all on open freeway and like a really just open road. So you've not only got the full sun on you the whole time, but it's the radiation from the tarmac as well. So 19 degrees Celsius, I mean, that's not hot. You know, in the summer when I was doubling up, I was going out on runs in like 46-degree heat. So it's not hot, but when you're running a marathon, yeah, it was warm, but it was a lot cooler at the start. And I think I should have stuck with that 4:11 pace that we set for the first 5K. I should have held that, because if I held that 4:11 pace, it wasn't as if I would have been by myself. There was actually another pack that I momentarily joined actually. So if you've seen my race video, there was a brief period, probably 2 to 3K, where I did leave that sub 3 pack and went on, but then I kind of chickened out and rejoined the sub 3 pack. So there was another pack ahead. Because it was so much cooler in the first bit, I feel like I definitely should have capitalized on that and held that 4:11 pace and have more of an even split rather than such a big final 10K. Like I averaged overall, I think 4 minutes 8 per K in the final 10. And a lot of those kilometers were, you know, substantially quicker than that. So I dropped a 4-minute K at one point. In my mind in the race, like, because it was feeling so easy, one of the things I used to try and get me to stay in that sub 3 pack up until 32K mark and not go on, I was saying, okay, stick here and then we can run. I mean, I started off by saying, let's try and run a sub 40-minute 10K in the final. That's never gonna happen. But then I thought, okay, final 5K, wouldn't it be cool to run a sub 20-minute 5K in the last 5? I couldn't do that in the end, but so it was a big finish in the end. But I do think that I probably could have got, I reckon, close to 255, definitely 256, but I reckon I had 255 in me on the day if I spread my effort a bit more evenly. Now, one of the things I found really interesting is comparing this marathon I ran this year in Perth to Perth Marathon last year. They were two very different races, two very different executions. This year, absolutely nailed it. Last year, completely stuffed it up. Now, there were reasons for that. I was injured. I knew I wasn't really in sub 3 shape, but I went for it anyway. I completely blew up in that race. But let's just have a look at some of the data. So to start with, let's look at the pictures. I mean, just look at the difference in how I look. I mean, I find this really funny. On the one hand, you know, I'm just having an absolute whale of a time this year, just relaxed as anything, looking fresh, you know, barely breaking a sweat, telling Sota every 5 minutes how good I'm feeling.
Today might be my day.
I think today's my day.
Today's my day, Sota.
And in the other picture, you see I am just on the brink of death. Now, bear in mind, this photo is obviously in the tunnel, and I haven't looked exactly, but I think that's around the 8K mark. So you can see last year, I was already dying at this point, really. I mean, I look sick, I look pale and just, it's horrible. Complete contrast to how I was this year. And that is reflected in all the data. So if we look here, this is Perth Marathon 25. The one in blue is the pace, and the line in yellow is my power. Very even, and because it's such a long race, you can't really see the big jump up at the end, but there is. There was like a 10-watt increase in power and a significant increase in pace as well. Now compare that with last year. This is Perth Marathon last year. Just a major drop off. Some of the metrics that the Stride Footpod captures are really interesting in tracking fatigue. So one of those measurements isn't unique to Stride Footpod, it's the ground contact time. I think we all know what ground contact time is, I don't need to explain that. So this is this year's marathon, no drop. So When we get fatigued, our ground contact time tends to increase by quite a lot. We want it as short as possible because it indicates that we're springing off the ground and using a lot of that elastic energy, and we're very efficient with a low contact time. So typically when we get really tired, that contact time increases a lot. With the marathon this year, it didn't drop at all. Compare that with last year. Look at this. That is a huge increase in ground contact time in the second part of the race. And it's the same story with Cadence. So Cadence is another one everyone's familiar with. When we get really tired, our cadence tends to drop off a cliff. And that is exactly what happened here on the marathon last year. Massive drop in cadence. Compare that with the marathon this year and no drop off whatsoever. It's just steady the entire way. Now, another metric you might not be so familiar with is leg spring stiffness. Now, this is a measure of how efficient we are at using that elastic energy. So using all the energy that's stored in our Achilles tendon and springing off the ground, it's a really good indicator of both efficiency, but also fatigue. So basically, we want a higher number. The higher the number, the better. And as we fatigue, that number tends to get lower. So if we look at the race from this year, there is a drop as we would expect, but it's pretty marginal. Well, not marginal, but it's pretty small. Compare that with last year, where a much bigger drop off there. Similarly with stride length, when we get tired, our stride length tends to drop, and that's exactly what happened on the marathon last year. Big drop off. Compare that with this year, I don't think that's any drop off at all. So another really cool metric that the Stride Footpod captures that helps us to track fatigue is what they call footpath data. So it is what it says. It just tracks the path of your foot through the air as we run. So this first diagram here is comparing the first 10K of this year's marathon with the final 10K. So the dotted line is the final 10K and the solid line is the first 10K. Now, what we expect to see when we fatigue is for our kickback to drop. So what really should have happened is that this dotted line should be lower than that solid line. But as you can see, the opposite actually happened. It looks like I actually got stronger in that final 10K. Now, this is because, yes, I was running faster, so it's going to have a bigger kickback. But normally when we fatigue, that really lowers. Now, compare this with the same data from last year's marathon, comparing the first 10K with the final 10K. And once again, the final 10K is the dotted line. You can see a big drop off, a big change in running form, indicating I was tired. So all of this data, even if you didn't know anything about the race, you could look at this, and the data from this year tells a story of a guy who was strong, who maybe even held a little bit back, unintentionally. Compare that with last year, all the data very clearly explains that this is a guy dying a slow and painful death. Another thing that was confirmed with me looking at this data is just what a huge impact running in a pack has on the outcome. So that effect of drafting is really big, even for people as slow as myself. I mentioned in another video that I previously thought the effects of drafting were only significant for elite runners who are running way quicker than me, but the Stride Footpod actually captures what they call air power, which measures what percentage of power we're putting down is necessary to overcome the air resistance. And it's really interesting because when I look at the marathon data, when I'm running in a pack, it is about half of when I'm running solo. So the first 10Ks of the race, I averaged 327 watts, was running at 4 minutes 14 per K at 2% air power, which is really low. So this is when I'm in a big pack, when I'm being shielded. Now, contrasting that for the final 10K, when I broke free from the pack, the air power during that section was 4%, so twice as much. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but let me tell you, that is a big difference. And over the course of a marathon, that's gonna have an effect of several minutes on the final finishing time. So the final 10K, I averaged 338 watts, so 11 watts more than the first 10. I was running at 4 minutes 8 per K for 4% air power. Now, without getting too much into the weeds of this is because of something called running effectiveness, which is just a measure of how efficient we are at converting that power to pace. Now, obviously, when there's wind or when there's more resistance because we're not being shielded by a pack, that has a big impact, and so we're much less effective at converting that power into pace, which is what you can see in my data. I'm having to expend a lot more energy for the same pace increase as I would do otherwise. So the moral of the story is drafting is a really big thing, and in races, you definitely need to think about that. Get into a pack because it has a very large effect on your final finish time. And as far as any in-race details are concerned, there's really not much to say. I mean, literally the story was, I felt very comfortable. I ticked off the first 32 Ks and then I ran hard at the end, and that was it. Everything went to plan. There wasn't really any drama during the race. There was a brief moment, as I said, where I left that sub 3 pack but then rejoined them, but everything just went so well. The nutrition worked really well. So I used my homemade gels and I was targeting 90 grams an hour. And it probably ended up being more like 100, maybe a little bit more. It worked fine. I absolutely love my homemade gels. I have no intention of using store-bought gels ever again in a marathon. I just love everything about my homemade ones. The taste, the consistency, how easy it is to go down, all of that stuff. Hydration worked really well. During my carb load and on the morning of the race, I was smashing the Precision Fuel 1500 hydration tablets, and they've got, I think, 750 milligrams of sodium in each one. So I had 4 of those the day before the race. So what's that? Like 3 grams of sodium in addition to all the sodium that's in my diet. And then the morning of the race, I had 2 of those tablets. So that'll be like 1.5 grams of sodium on the morning of the race. And then during the race, I just had sips of water at all the aid stations. And that worked fine. Like, obviously you don't get much out of those cups, but I didn't really feel like I needed much. I was well hydrated. So at all the aid stations, I tried to get 2 cups, and I drank one and then chucked the other one on my head to try and cool down. And that all worked really well. My pre-race eating and everything, absolutely perfect. I had 0 stomach issues, 0 bloating. I didn't feel like I ran out of energy. It all just worked perfectly. So I feel like I've got the nutrition and fueling side of things absolutely nailed, which is a huge thing because that's a big part of a marathon. So I'm not going to change any of that going forward. And I think I'll leave it there for this. As you could probably tell, this wasn't really planned. I just thought I'd sit down and talk about the race with a mate. Thank you so much for your support, like the messages and everything. I love this little community we're building here. So thank you so much. Awesome videos coming up. So make sure you're subscribed. I'm going to go really deep into how I adjusted the Norwegian singles approach for this marathon. Also, if you'd like to get any more details on this race that I haven't answered now, please ask them. There's probably a bunch of stuff that I've left off, but thank you so much for following. Running is awesome. Keep at it, and I'll see you very soon.